order. So this afternoon, we'll hear from Department of Education, who will be presenting their biennial budget. Before we get to the superintendent, if we can just have early learning quickly present their budget, and then we can move on to DOE. Lauren, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can I ask Jordana Ferreira to be allowed host access so that she can pull up our slides?
Okay.
I don't think they want to touch it.
Hold on, I'm gonna recess. To order. So Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Dela Cruz, Vice Chair Keith Agaran, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you this afternoon. I'd like to introduce two of my staff members who are joining me. Jordana Ferreira is EOEL's Government Affairs Specialist, and Colleen Momohara serves as the Educational Specialist for our EOEL Public Pre-K program. As requested, I'd like to share with you the journey our agency and our entire early childhood sector has taken over this last year. The challenges and successes we've seen and experienced have directly informed our budget requests. Next slide, please. When the state legislature established the Executive Office on Early Learning, or EOEL, it's because legislators understood how incredibly important a child's first years are to their success. The most rapid period of brain development occurs during our first 5 years. During this time, children are adapting, learning, and forming important connections at an increasingly rapid pace, which is unmatched to any other time in their lives. Investing in our youngest children is really a long-term relief package that addresses many of our social injustices. And access to high-quality early learning programs has been shown to reduce crime, reduce poverty and educational gap, yields higher educational attainment, and prepares our future workforce. It all starts in the earliest years. Equally as important, it's also a short-term investment. Early care and education provides immediate support to boys' workforce and is essential to economic recovery, as it allows parents and caregivers to return to work and produces jobs that help to stimulate our economy. Next slide, please. The development of young children is entirely dependent on their relationships and interactions with the world around them. As children grow and develop, they learn to speak, walk, smile, and all the other big milestones for the people and communities who support them. Healthy, quality relationships and interactions are critical for these milestones and the child's development. Next slide, please. In 2012, when the state legislature established the Executive Office on Early Learning, it's because you understood that the state needed to invest in children during these early years. Many of you who are here today have understood and invested in our agency to coordinate and lead the state's efforts in early childhood. You recognize that young children deserved a greater focus and investment by state government. Next slide, please. The state legislature tasked us with this charge when you created our agency in 2012. EOEL works across state departments, organizations, and sectors toward a comprehensive and integrated early childhood system for our state. Next slide. From this statutory obligation, we remain true to our vision that every child in Hawaii has access to high-quality early childhood development and learning experiences, which lay the foundation for lifelong well-being. Our mission focuses on collaborations and partnerships in order to achieve a solid foundation of early childhood development and learning, meaningful supports for families, and lifting up a stable, competent, and supported workforce. Again, we address this by making connections, leveraging resources, advocating for effective policies, and collaborating with partners to support quality programs. Next slide, please. When we describe EOEL, we like to think of the agency as having two branches of functions that interact with each other. The first is to coordinate and improve the early childhood system as a whole. The second is administration of a direct care and education program, our public pre-kindergarten program. I'd like to provide just a little more depth for each of these functions. As coordinators for the early childhood system, we play a critical role. As you know, the early childhood sector does not have a centralized authority. As you can see on the slide, the many agencies, organizations, and programs that support our state's youngest children in health, education, and care. EOL systems help bring the community together to improve our overall services to Hawaii's young children and families. We help to identify barriers and challenges, as well as opportunities and successes that can be replicated. Next slide, please. In addition to coordinating the system, which includes education and care, our agency also administers our own program for children in the year before kindergarten. The EOEL Public Pre-Kindergarten Program provides early care and early learning at no cost to families. Our program is known as one of the highest ranking public pre-kindergarten programs in the nation, thanks to three main hallmarks: well-trained and well-supported educators, cost-efficient and effective use of public funds, and prioritization of at-risk and underserved children and families. With even greater investment in 2019 by the state legislature, and clear charges for coordination and administration of our program, we began 2020 with high hopes. Next slide, please. But as we know, 2020 had different plans for so many of us. 2020 changed many facets of life in Hawaii, including our early childhood sector. Next slide, please. We remember that 2020 started with a spotlight on early childhood and the legislature's vision to provide access to childcare and early learning to all of Hawaii's 3- and 4-year-olds. Next slide, please. But then the novel coronavirus arrived in Hawaii in March, and at that time everything changed. By the middle of the month, Governor Ige had announced a stay-at-home order. Schools and businesses were closed. All non-essential businesses and activities had to stop. Some of the unsung heroes during these early days were early child care providers. Next slide, please. Under that original stay-at-home order, childcare was deemed an essential business. Childcare is a necessity for working families and fulfills an essential role in Hawaii's economic recovery. The disruption to the childcare industry because of the pandemic highlighted the importance of childcare on national, state, and local levels, as millions of Americans can't work without access to safe and reliable childcare. Here in Hawaii, a number of private childcare providers remained open so that our first responders and essential workers, like those working to feed us and keep our shelves stocked, had somebody to watch their young kids. Other private organizations like Kama'aina Kids and YMCA either pivoted existing programs or developed new programs to care for older children in kindergarten through 6th grade. Next slide, please. By May, as we as a state prepared to open, the early childhood sector continued its unsung heroes. The Department of Human Services worked with the Department of Health, the state legislature, and the early childhood community to put forth guidelines to help providers reopen and expand caring for more children. Contracts and later grants were administered through Hawaii Community Foundation to support providers with much needed funds. And the department also filed for multiple waivers so that Child Care Connection Hawaii could be offered to more families and providers who needed help. During this time, EOEL worked to support the efforts of our sister agency, DHS, through collaboration and disseminating information to community partners. Next slide, please.
Lauren, how many more slides do you have?
We have 27 slides in total.
So how many more do you have?
Sorry. Sorry, Jordana, where are we at now?
It's over 20.
Left.
23.
Okay, maybe if you can move it along a little bit faster so we can get to the budget components.
Sure. Jordana, do you mind moving down? Let's see. Jordana, can you show the slide number for this slide? Thank you. So specifically, as we've developed our budget, we've prioritized one thing above anything else. This has been minimizing to the greatest extent the impacts to direct services for young children and our families. For example, our public pre-kindergarten program. In other words, young children and their families are number one, and while we understand the dire economic situation that we're in, we know that the legislature is faced with the unfortunate task of balancing a $4 billion budget shortfall. However, we know the trajectory will get worse if cuts to investments in our youngest keiki and their families are made. When we talk about economic recovery and even economic development, early learning programs must be a part of those plans. as these programs support the current workforce by providing jobs and allowing working families to sustain jobs and financial security, as well as our future workforce. Moreover, investing in the earliest years can help improve outcomes for our youngest children, ultimately reducing social costs to the state in later years. Next slide, please. With this in mind, we put together our budget, which the governor has approved as a part of his package. You'll see a little over $1.3 million in reductions. These reductions include decreases in EOEL's operating costs, travel expenses for staff and ELB members, and reductions to the charter school pre-K program. With respect to charter schools, $775,000 was reduced. It's important to note that pursuant to Act 46, or House Bill 2543, which passed this last session, the State Public Charter School Commission now has purview over charter school pre-K classrooms. As such, we're requesting that the remaining balance of $3.2 million be transferred from EOEL to the Charter School Commission. Should this request be granted, our adjusted budget from general funds will be $5,747,726 for a total of $5,873,354. I'd like to break it down a little further for you. So if we can advance the slide. The budget on the previous slide currently funds 37 total EOEL public pre-K classrooms. 18 charter school classrooms now under the authority of Charter School Commission with a pending request to transfer funds, and the positions needed to fulfill EOEL statutory responsibilities, which include the administration of the EOEL public pre-kindergarten classrooms. Next slide, please. I'd also like to call out some of the items that are included in the budget that were appropriated by the 2019 state legislature through Act 276 or Senate Bill 78. That piece of legislation supported expansion efforts both in our programs as well as in our coordinator role. The state legislature asked us to expand our program by 10 classrooms, all of which opened this school year. And from the same bill, the legislature also funded necessary professional development and coaching supports offered through our Early Learning Academy and Induction program. It also included funds to transfer existing DOE public pre-kindergarten classrooms, not including SPED or Title I, over to EOEL. The legislature also made a commitment to maintain 18 existing charter school public pre-kindergarten classrooms with $4 million of general funds, which replaced federal funds that were time limited. And finally, the 2019 legislature invested in the EOEL systems coordination and public pre-kindergarten administration with an additional 6 positions that have been critical to our agency, especially through the pandemic. Only 4 of these positions required funding appropriations. Next slide, please. We wanted to break out specifically the only things that could be seen as additional requests in our budget. It's important to note that these are not, in effect, additional requests, but will allow us to continue serving children and families at the same capacity we have been. First, the appropriation for just under $250,000 restores funds for 7 classroom positions. They were cut last session because they appeared vacant on a report to the legislature. And while these positions weren't filled with permanent hires, they were filled with warm bodies, and these classrooms had the capacity to serve up to 140 children. These are classroom positions, and therefore, even if vacant or showing up as vacant, we must have the position and the funding to open the classroom. Each classroom by law must have a teacher and an educational aide. Restoring these funds ensures that we're able to continue with the 7 classrooms. And finally, we're asking for 2 permanent full-time teacher position counts. We don't need funding attached to these, and we're only requesting the position counts.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
No question.
Senator Kidani.
Thank you, Lauren. So the last one, the 2 permanent full-time equivalent teaching positions, you said you need the position count and not the funding?
Yes, that's correct.
Why is that?
The funds were appropriated to EOEL through Act 276, which came over in 2019. And at that time, there were funds provided to transfer pre-K programs that were existing in the DOE over to EOEL. Although we had the funds that were transferred, the positions were not included. So those are the two positions that we're requesting without funding.
Oh, okay, so you had the funds, but because the positions were not obligated, you could not add the positions.
Yes, that's correct.
So, Lauren, from the beginning of EOEL, we started with how many classrooms?
Colleen, can I ask you to address that question?
And compared to what we have now, is basically what I want to ask.
We started off with 18 classrooms. I'm sorry, step back. It was 19 schools and 21 classrooms, sorry, in 2014.
They're having trouble or something.
Lauren, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, so we started with 21 classrooms, and what do we have now?
We have 37 classrooms.
Okay, so we've added 16 classrooms. Is that, so in your forecast for EOEL, are we where we planned to be?
I think our original plan was to request for CIP funds and additional classrooms for the current fiscal biennium, but given the current economic situation that we're in, we're just trying to maintain what's already existing.
So all 37 classrooms are funded by state funds, or are any of these classrooms funded through private funds?
All 37 are funded through state funds.
And have we ever had the opportunity to add classrooms using private funds?
Yes, we do have classrooms on some of our school campuses that are funded by private funds. And right now we have a partnership with Kamehameha Schools to do so.
How many classrooms is that?
Colleen, do you have that information?
I believe there's 6 currently, but one of them is privately funded outside of KS.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I didn't hear.
There's 6 privately funded classrooms currently.
Okay, so Kamehameha Schools funds 6 classrooms, and where are those 6 classrooms?
I know that it's at Honokuli and Waimea, Uhale. I would need to check on the other 3, I'm sorry.
Okay, so could we get a breakdown of where all not just the 6 funded by Kamehameha Schools, but all of your classrooms, where they're located, what islands? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the Department of Education. So thank you for your patience. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to see everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy
So,
New Year.
aloha to the chairs, De La Cruz and Chair Kidani, and all senators. Mahalo for your time. Mahalo for the opportunity to share with you our proposed operating budget for fiscal biennium 2021-23. I'm Christina Kishimoto, Superintendent of the Department of Education. With me today is the department's Chief Financial Officer, Brian Hallett. Virtually, I have all of my superintendents, assistant superintendents, and deputy superintendents on if we have specific questions to go into. So I have Deputy Superintendent Phyllis Unabasami, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Curriculum and Instruction, Terry Ushijima. She started in November, and we're thrilled to have her in that position. Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Facilities, Randy Tanaka. Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Information and Technology Services, Brooke Connor. Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Strategy, Innovation, and Performance, Rodney Luke. Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Student Support Services, Heidi Armstrong, and Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Talent Management, Cindy Corvell. So I have 4 overview slides before we get into the budget specifically, and so I am on slide 3. Slide 3 is the department vision and mission as requested. At the end of the last school year and the start of this school year, as you know, this has been unlike anything that we've experienced before in the Hawaii Department of Education and in this entire state. Leading through during this crisis period has required tremendous effort, tenacity, and resilience to safeguard our core mission. I'm deeply appreciative of the entire HIDOE team for their tremendous efforts, dedication, and care in moving our school system forward during this disruptive and unknowing time to ensure that students have access to learning within a supportive environment. We've been intentional with an innovation approach to both the instructional and operations side of the department, continuing the modernization of our systems and processes to focus on increased student achievement. So while this health crisis highlighted areas needing improvement, I remain committed to leveraging this opportunity to continue to modernize, improve, and move the department into the future. Our student success remains our central why we teach, why we lead, and why we serve in public education. If we turn to slide 3, you see just a highlight of some of our demographics. The importance of the just overview of demographics is that we use this information to help inform the design of our programs and our equity of access approach. Without going through all of the data points here, I will highlight that 52% of our students are students who are determined to be economically disadvantaged. And so in a time period of crisis, it becomes even more important for the Department of Education to continue to be not only providing public education services, but to be a safety net to our families in need. If you go to slide 5, you'll notice that I am also highlighting some changes and shifts in new metrics that we are using during the pandemic. The work that we've been doing has been disrupted, as you certainly know, and our typical accountability measures such as test scores, in-person attendance, these are temporarily disrupted, and so we needed to redesign our measures to capture the factors that are impacting learning today. We've had to look at performance and accountability in new ways and in terms of looking at vulnerabilities that either are exacerbated or new due to the pandemic. In October, the Board of Education adopted the metrics or new metrics to monitor and evaluate the department's plans for reopening school during the 2021 school year. The department designed an interactive data dashboard available to the public to visually track, analyze, and display key COVID-related performance indicators requested by the Board of Ed. And these indicators showcase 3 levels of data. Data by statewide level, complex level, and school level, and it gives information such as quarterly student grades, attendance, learning models being used, access to devices, number of PPEs at our school sites, etc. So this online resource will be updated as new metrics are reported. It should also be noted that the increased reliance on technology in new ways, such as ensuring connectivity, devices, and additional supports for students, adds to our ongoing costs created by the health pandemic. Many of these costs are still not fully defined as we continue to evolve our designs. If you go to slide 6, in late September, the Department of Health came out with its reopening guidance for schools, designed by our state health experts to help us with decision-making related to reopening our school campuses. It outlined levels of community transmission of COVID cases that would trigger certain learning models for schools to consider. As a department, we set statewide expectations around health and safety protocols, but we recognize that decisions about transitioning between learning models has to be done at the complex and school level because student needs and conditions are unique to their communities. The Center for Disease Controls conducted a local visit with us. They were able to visit several of our campuses at the end of 2020 to provide insight on best practices for mitigating the spread of COVID-19 at schools. Some of the schools visited included Campbell High, Waido Middle, Waianae Elementary, and Pu'uhale Elementary. They shared feedback and they indicated that they were impressed with protocols that are in place, many of which they touted as innovative and something they would share with other schools and school districts. A post-assessment was provided by them, which highlights areas that are working well and some additional suggestions that they have for us as well. So in addition to the State Department of Health reopening guidance, schools and complex areas are constantly monitoring the daily state case counts and are continuously planning for potential adjustments that prioritize the health and safety of our schools. And we continue to monitor also the potential for upticks in our own community. And this is important to the financial discussion we're going to go into right now. If we look even beyond our state lines, at the national level, as of this Monday, there are 90 million cases around the world, of which 22 million are here in the U.S. The states with the highest positivity rate, as you've been part of those discussions, are California, Texas, and Florida. Some of our own children are there in college, our families are there, and the back and forth is something that certainly is part of our ongoing conversations. The death toll in Hawaii is 309, in the U.S. it's 375,000, and around the globe is 1.9 million because of COVID. So new to all of us is a global health landscape that has this type of impact on our day-to-day classrooms and school design. And so we must remain flexible and responsive. And so we're going to go to slide 8 and review our federal funds.
Thank you, Dr. Kay. So, good afternoon, Chair Dela Cruz, Chair Kidani, and Senators. Brian Hallett, CFO for the Department of Education. As mentioned, we are on slide 8. I don't know if IT wants to show that on the screen for those who are following along in the presentation. So, in light of the pandemic, we've been very carefully monitoring targeted equity-based support for schools that are and very fortunate that schools can continue to rely on several major recurring federally funded programs. This list here on this slide shows the national level appropriations for title grants that we are receiving. At this time, based on the analysis we've received from the Federal Fund Information for the States, FFIS, for the Consolidated Appropriations Act from 2021 that just passed, the outlook for these sources is stable and predictable. In fact, there are indications of the potential for a slight increase in the neighborhood of approximately 1% from current year funding levels. So these funds are appropriated in federal fiscal year 21 to the U.S. Department of Education and will be allocated to the State Department of Education for use next school year. This list, of course, does not include the CARES funds, which we'll be talking about on the next slide. So turning to slide number 9, the CARES Federal Relief Aid. In late March 2020, the Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security CARES Act was signed into law, providing $13.2 billion in funding at the national level for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, the ESSER Fund. This is to address the impacts of COVID-19 on public schools. Hawaii received $43.3 million from this fund, and the department has been publishing a monthly report on our website on the planned uses and expenditures of these funds, and the link is provided on this slide. In late December 2020, with the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which was signed into law, when it was signed into law on December 27th, it provided an additional $54.3 billion for the ESSER Fund. In January 5th, the department was notified that Hawaii would be receiving $183.6 million through this program. The Board of Education will be reviewing the planned uses of these funds at their regularly scheduled January 21st Finance and Infrastructure Committee meetings, and materials for this meeting are expected to be posted to our website by the end of this week. Just a few things to point out about these funds are the lapse date for these funds are September 30, 2023. Funds may be used for pre-award costs dating back to March 13, 2020, when the national emergency was declared. And allowable uses are broad and flexible, which is very helpful, with specific call-outs in the new legislation around mitigating student learning loss, preparing to reopen schools, and improving air quality.
So we're going to turn to slide 11. This has been, as you know, a very difficult budget planning year. And because of the devastating projected cuts to the school and classroom levels, we have been providing information about programming and service impacts. Principal voice has been critical in this process, particularly as they both inform the internal decisions, but also are critical to providing information to families about the fiscal challenges at hand and what these challenges are going to mean for their own children. We engaged in an internal tri-level process to develop our budget to determine where reductions would be made, with core assumptions about protecting the teaching and learning infrastructure, including the design of our curriculum core. We conducted a tri-level process that included a state-level review, complex-level plans, and school financial plans. In addition, we created a budget program review subcommittee this year to help inform state-level review. I pulled together 3 subcommittees focused on business function efficiencies, school-level efficiencies, and instruction and equity. Each subcommittee had tri-level representation. We met weekly in the month of October. The subcommittee identified essential functions to preserve as we face budget reductions. The subcommittee's recommendations were reviewed by tri-level leadership. I also sought feedback from the Hawaii Executive Collaborative and education advocates in the state. I presented proposed operating budget with imposed 10% budget reduction to the Board of Ed on December 3rd, 2020, and the board approved the proposed operating budget. Now that the board has adopted a budget which has been submitted to the executive office, the hard lift is now preparing and organizing our work for these massive cuts and changes which are underway. Cuts at this level have implications around staffing, programming, scheduling, and so forth. We will be undergoing impact planning throughout the spring semester based on decisions made throughout the legislative process. On January 1st, I will be presenting the school financial plan impacts to the Board of Ed, including staff reduction numbers by employee type and by school. So schools have now completed their financial plans, and we're going to be presenting what that means in terms of which areas are going to be cut and what staff are going to have to be cut in order to meet those new financial levels. I've also begun the process and continue the process of engaging parents and community on our budget. From this month through March, so January through March, we are hosting community convenings in each district to discuss with parents our DOE financial outlook, the status on our significant budget cuts, what we're requesting of the legislature, and we're providing them another space as parents to give us continued feedback about these difficult budget decisions and priorities from their perspectives, especially because of the impact on their own children. A.S. Hallett will now speak to the potential budget cuts on the next slide. You will see that we stand to absorb over $400 million in cuts each year. And I would say that our operating core and mission of teaching and learning is at risk of major disruption unless we address some of these needs. A.S. Hallett?
Thank you. We're on slide 12, potential budget reductions. Now, we know and appreciate that senators, that you've been in direct communication with schools in your area, and you've been hearing about the fiscal challenges they're facing. This slide is to help to put context on what is behind much of what you've been hearing about. As mentioned, in November, December, schools were engaged in developing their financial plans for next school year, and they were factoring in a minus 10% budget reduction related to the program review reductions. That is what we're looking at for the first year of the next biennium. The planning they're doing now is for next school year, which is the first year of the biennium that is before you. There are 3 major impacts to our budget for next year, causing significant shortfalls that will decimate our public school systems. These are a $100.2 million non-recurring reduction imposed in the current fiscal year that has been carried forward into the next year, program review reductions totaling $164 million per year, and the yet-to-be-confirmed but looming labor savings adjustment for our employees. So this slide shows that when factoring in the fiscal year 21 reductions being carried over, the new program reductions, and the looming labor savings, all 3 that are contained in the executive's financial plan, we are currently faced with a 22% reduction to state funding for public schools. So these are the 3 impacts totaling the $393 million for public schools that we need your help with. Going a little more into detail about each of them, starting with the starting base column. This is the fiscal year 2021 general fund appropriation provided to us by the governor, which includes the folding in of previously approved collective bargaining and is less the non-recurring cost of $1.5 million for early college. This starting base that we show here does not include the $100.2 million of fiscal year 21 budget cuts that last session were proposed and presumably adopted by the legislature as one-time reductions. If you want to see more details on that, that's in the appendix is item 11 for details on what made up those reductions for this year. Now the next column, the $100.2 million, again for fiscal year 21, was intended to be one-time non-recurring reductions. In the development of the executive biennium budget, these non-recurring reductions were maintained for the new biennium. So the department does not yet know how these cuts will be extended for fiscal year 22 on top of the program review reductions. These cuts have not been factored into the school's financial plans for next year. Next column is the 10% program review reductions. Based on the August 17th, 2020 executive memorandum, each department submitted budget cut proposals. The department prepared a package of reductions totaling 10% or $164 million using a process that was described by Superintendent on the previous slide. These are the cuts that on December 3rd, the Board of Education reluctantly approved, with the reluctance in large part due to their awaiting further details on how schools would be implementing the reductions. These are the cuts that schools have been adjusting to in their recently completed financial plans. And now that the first phase of the financial plans were completed by December 31st, the department has been compiling the impacts and, as mentioned previously, will be presenting them to the Board of Education at their next meeting on January 21st. The next column, labor savings. This is only being included for discussion purposes. The form of labor savings, what it ultimately may take, are subject to negotiations between the union and the governor's office. So again, these are the three impacts totaling $393 million, 22%, that public schools need your help with. So Dr. K, legislative priorities.
So if we go to slide 14, we're going to talk for a few minutes about legislative priorities. The National Council of State Legislators has had a clear framework for over 2 decades about best practices in public education financing. It's a national best practice to develop an education budget that provides equity, stability, predictability, and adequacy per their guidance. Hawaii's weighted student formula is a strong example of equity. Students' differentiated learning needs are weighted and provided differentiated funding support. Our principals, CASs, and staff, and a public partner, a private partner, serve on the Committee on Weights, and thus our education experts provide input into that equity formula. It's an outstanding design in Hawaii. We have defined our legislative priorities, therefore, around the other 3 best practice areas that need further vetting. If you go to slide 15, I'm providing a summary of our 3 legislative priorities for this legislative session. The department believes access to quality public education must be protected for all students. Therefore, we are requesting that the legislature restore the $100.2 million to Hawaii's base budget. The base budget provides stability and predictability that is at the heart of long-term planning for excellence. And the removal of this $100 million from the base budget has destabilized our schools. We are also requesting that we retain and maximize federal relief funds to stabilize public schools, particularly on the instructional side. We must address our student instructional needs and ensure that there are no lost generations of students because of this pandemic. This does mean that if we're prioritizing our federal relief funds on the instructional side, we do have operating costs that we don't have an answer for how we're going to address. Third, we are asking for changes to state law to provide fiscal predictability and reliability for public education. And so we will be putting forth a request for legislation focused on a maintenance of effort approach to stabilizing year-to-year funding that allows for predictability and stability for our school principals. The current budget reductions limit the department's capacity to deliver on services that support student learning, especially at the school level, and threatens the safety net that the state of Hawaii has come to rely on through its public schools. Legislative priorities for the 2021 session are focused around restoring and preserving funding for school operations and student support. The department will continue to work diligently to ensure its ability to meet its core mission of teaching and learning and sustaining essential functions and infrastructure to ensure student achievement, even during periods of economic decline. And with slide 16, my cabinet and I are available to answer questions. So mahalo for your time.
Thank you, Superintendent. Can I start with, on your slide, you talked, the understanding is that we're going to receive 183 million for ESSER.
Correct.
When is that expected?
We have been notified that it's coming, and it's been fast-tracked, is what we've been told. We have not yet received the grant award notification, but we expect it any day now.
And that has to be, ESSER is for the secondary schools. That has to be used at the school level.
No, that's not restricted to the school level. That has to be used for public education. So that includes our DOE and charter schools.
Okay, so what's the plans for that then?
So we are pulling together a budget proposal that's going to the Board of Ed on January 21st. The budget breakdown prioritizes restoring some of the funds that are being lost in weighted student formula, as well as some of the special education funds. This is a high priority because without restoring at least some of that, we're going to have an impact on our capacity in terms of our labor workforce having to be reduced. We're also prioritizing the learning loss mitigation program, so the approaches we need to take on to address students who are demonstrating that they are not keeping up with their grade level expectations and/or are showing a slide this year or have had loss of instructional time for any number of reasons.
So can you provide us with an updated chart as to where that 183.6 million will go?
We will have that on Friday afternoon of this week.
Okay.
Thank you.
The ESSER funds that was received a couple months ago, the 43.3, how is that spent?
Do you have the attachment?
I do. The best source is to look at the report on the web. We have 6 million go to summer school. We had 5 million go to learning devices, continuing or CTE. We hired student interns for connectivity, for learning platforms, distance learning, health and safety, transition safety needs, and so on.
Can you provide us with those copies?
Oh, sure.
Speaking of connectivity, do we have a count of how many students are out there without connectivity, without devices? Is that something that your IT department has been able to figure out?
Yeah, so we have AS Brooke Kana on, if I can have him answer some summary information, but we also can provide all the data charts. So AS Kana?
Yes, we started the COVID pandemic with a shortfall of approximately 50,000 devices, approximately 20,000 students that didn't have any sort of network access. We are finalizing a analysis and report for the board focusing on the gap, the number of students that are left. That is down to the 3,000 or 4,000 approximately, so it comes down to about 2 to 2.5% of the population. That does include, of course, some families that have opted out of using devices for their kids. They've specifically requested to use paper packets. And it does also include, in some situations, the schools have built an online hub on the campus where, in a socially distant way, kids can come and access their education. But again, that's being finalized. We do have detailed reports of what devices we bought, which complex areas they went to, which schools they went to, and we can provide that to the committee as well.
We're in the second quarter. We've been in this pandemic since March, and we don't know the numbers yet.
Well, we do know the numbers. They change. Remember, we have changing conditions. So we have, as we started out, we had a number that families let us know. We met that demand with either new devices or schools handed out devices. So we met the demand of what was requested. I think it was 26,000 were requested, plus our order of new devices that we pushed out into the community. As students and teachers started teaching and working with each other online, there was an increased demand in terms of bandwidth, in terms of making sure they had the right cameras and so forth. And so more families started realizing they couldn't have multiple children at home, for example, on the same, with their internet access. And so there's been additional requests throughout each month. So we keep updating based on what families are telling us. If a device breaks, we replace that device. Everyone who needs a device has a device. Everyone who needs connectivity either has it via Wi-Fi at home or a MiFi that's provided, or they have access to a school site where they have connectivity. The needs keep shifting and changing for families, and we keep working to adjust to meet those needs. Where we are now is also the principals starting to think about, as they transition to the summer next year, how many devices they're going to need for refresh. And that's going to be a longer term conversation that we're going to have with the legislature around how do we have a refresh system now that we've gone into this level of technology use.
Yeah, and I think my concern is that I know when we started the pandemic and knew how many thousands of devices we needed, there was a shortfall. I mean, it was hard to get devices, and that's just because all the schools, all the businesses were asking it, for them. So I want to make sure that, we are, I can't say ahead of the game because we'll never be ahead of the game, but we're aware of, what that's going to be so we can get a jump start, whether or not the devices we have can be upgraded, and whether we're seeking out that information locally or not. So if there is any kind of report that you have on this situation of digital devices and connectivity, I would like to see it, please.
We'll send you the link to what we have online that does track the device requests and connectivity requests. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Do you guys have questions before I continue?
Yeah,
Go
since
ahead.
you're talking about the laptops and devices, whatever you provide, can I ask how's the situation with South beyond Pahala at Ocean View, where we have many of our Micronesians living there and many are homeless and attending? I would believe the closest school for them would be Naalehu. That was an issue, and so can we be brief, in summary, if you were able to reach out to them?
So we have A.S. Connor, but we also have A.S. Armstrong, who oversees our homeless liaisons. So we can address that from both sides very succinctly. So
And I would think maybe not only my Big Island's community, but I think that was pretty much prevalent on the Big Island. I think an issue.
Yeah, there's several geographical locations that have had that kind of problem, and we've been tackling it on a community by community basis, whether it's by providing MiFis or in some cases really remote areas, even cell phone coverage, and the southern part of the Big Island that you're talking about is one of those. We also have mobile buses that can go to a place near the community that has enough cell coverage to get data access to those families, and they can come there. They can also go to the school campus, like Naalehu, and get Wi-Fi access there as well. There are also community centers that we're talking with on Ocean View. We extended this network to a community center there that provides access for students as well. And that's a discussion that we continue to go through as we work with the communities. This is also part of the broadband Hui group that has been meeting, where we work with Hawaiian Tel and Spectrum as they build out their infrastructure, and DCCA about the infrastructure that is built out as well. Obviously, the situation with homeless students is particularly challenging. I'll see if A.S. Armstrong has any comments that she wants to add for that.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Heidi Armstrong. The homeless liaisons, and we have homeless liaisons in every complex area, have been able to ensure that all of the identified homeless students do have access to devices and connectivity. They are continually searching for homeless students and families that have not been identified, but as of now, those that have been identified, we can say 100% do have access to devices and technology.
Okay. So the reports have been coming in pretty much from the district superintendents then. Most of the issues, I guess.
Yes, so we collect data on all of these data points. That was a previous slide about this new data we had to collect, and we report it out. That comes from the complex area superintendent for the district and by school.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see where we are. So if you can get some information to the chair, identifying what areas in the state that has been more challenging and how they've been met.
We can provide a connectivity and device report update.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you clarify, Superintendent, when you talk about connectivity has been made available at the schools, does that mean they drive to the school and sit in the parking lot, or is there a classroom open to them to do their homework?
It means there's a learning hub inside the school, and there's staffing there to provide even technical support of getting online and making sure that the kids can do. So the kids are doing their distance learning, but they're at a school site in a safe space.
That's, thank you very much for that, because I have seen pictures of students on the mainland sitting in a parking lot on the, I guess you call it the car stop, the cement blocks, with their laptops on their lap trying to do homework. And I was just wondering if that was the same picture that we were painting here.
No, we have had some vans that Heidi Armstrong and her team have outfitted for hard-to-reach communities to get out, but they actually carry with them tables, chairs, laptops, the connectivity that's needed, so the Wi-Fi, and they have staff there to have the kids actually go on. So they're not sitting without that kind of support.
So can you provide this committee with a number of those vans that you have, and where they're targeting, and what has the cost been? Because that's over and above that you guys had budgeted for previously before this pandemic came on. So I would
Yes, we
like
can
to see
provide that update,
information.
Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. And then while we're talking about virtual learning, is there any funding that's going to be provided to support the schools in transitioning from the SLS onto another learning venue, another platform?
Yes, so principals and CASAs have been part of the planning team, and they have the transition steps that we've identified the funds to transition. Not only the immediate funds that are needed, but just the longer term plan around how we're staging up and preparing for summer school already. Believe it or not, we're already in summer school planning and what kind of online program we're going to need to support, not knowing how much of this pandemic is still going to be impacting closures and access and all of that. We're staging up for the summer and even for next school year. So the funds have been identified for each of those components via the CARES funding that we've received.
And is that going to be funded out of administration's budget or by weighted student formula for each school?
Well, it's out of the federal funds that we're receiving, so we're prioritizing the federal funds for this utilization to support learning.
Okay, but right now we don't have an idea what that cost is?
We have some of those costs. I don't know if we have the breakdown for certainly
The transition portion, no, it's,
Yeah.
we just have a lump amount. It's
Okay.
a couple million.
Okay, and while I'm talking about weighted student formula, I just want, before I forget, PPEs. In the very early stages of the pandemic, we couldn't get PPEs fast enough to help our schools. So principals use weighted student formula. Hawai'i told me that they were going to be reimbursed. That never happened as far as I know. So I don't know if you have a breakdown of how much the schools paid and how are we going to make them whole again? Because I understand they gave DOE the information, but it was never, I don't know if it was never given to Hawai'i. But when I asked Hawai'i, they said they had turned over all the funds to UI already, so it was not, it was out of their hands, and it was budget and finance. I guess that made the decision not to pay. So where are we on that? Do you know what the whole story is?
Well, we can talk about where we are with funding.
So Randy Tanaka's shop, Office of Fiscal, facilities collected data and we're ready to request reimbursements from Hawai'i before FEMA changed the rules, and that didn't happen. The total at this point was $4.8 million. 4.7 of that was cost that was incurred at various schools. $100,000 was cost incurred centrally. So that's where we are now.
So to assure that the schools don't have to use weighted student formula again, how are we purchasing PPEs? Because when the individual schools have to purchase their own, it's probably 2 or 3 times more costly than buying it in bulk through Hawai'i, and a lot of it was free to Hawai'i and then was distributed. So how are we making sure that this doesn't happen again?
Should I take that or should I throw it to Randy?
Well, part of it is that we're going through our budget proposal for the new federal funds and how we have funds set aside through the rest of this school year. So we're all set. Now we're planning for the summer and next school year, where we need to allocate funds and we need to know what process we're going to be going through to acquire the PPEs needed. The part of our budget request to the board will be to look at a set aside for the PPEs for summer and next school year, which is where we have a gap right now. Brandy Tanaka, who's on, AS Tanaka, he's been managing this whole system with his team and working with Hawai'i and others, including donations of PPEs, which have been significant and are extremely helpful from the private sector. So, AS Tanaka, are you on?
Yes, Superintendent. Hello, Senator Kidani.
Hello, Randy.
Your initial evaluation is correct. In the early days, the schools provided and took the proactive measure to get the PPEs. When we had gotten the relationship with Hawai'i established, we took that over from a central standpoint. All of the schools run a 60-day inventory, and we monitor it through an online system that we call CPT. So we know in real time what the inventory is, and we replenish. The challenge from the very beginning, we were led to believe that there was reimbursement. We started running that tab, and Brian is exactly correct. 4.8 million is the current reimbursement level. At some point in time, in the last 45 days, we were notified that Hawai'i would not be able to reimburse that for whatever reason. And so we sit on this, I would call it a debt, to figure out how to rebalance that liability. Hawai'i has said they have inventory for us until February, and then February to the end of the school year, we will need to manage that based on what was called the burn rate. We are fairly comfortable as we have been monitoring the burn rate, and depending on the degrees of the student population, we are holding relatively well at this point. There are 17 items on this list, which we manage. So right now, the schools, that demand or need for those PPEs, those 17 items come through facility operation.
So are you, Randy, are you looking at adjusting the burn rate depending on how many students are going to be back in the classroom as we continue bringing students back? Are you, I mean, I know it's a lot to calculate, but knowing what you know and with the lesser number of students that have been in school, there's a projection that we're going to have more students in the classroom. So has all of that been projected out?
Yes, we have that forecasted. We're, like you say, watching the burn rate very closely. And so far, the pace has not outstripped our inventory and our supply, our backlog of supply. So we monitor it every Friday. The schools monitor that inventory, and we monitor it at the central location.
Thank you.
Chair?
Go ahead.
Did I lose something regarding her question regarding the reimbursement, or if there has been reimbursements then made to the schools regarding the use of their weighted student formula monies in place of, not receiving PPEs?
So at this point, no, that has not been solved. That's a current outstanding amount where we've needed to shift our thinking because it's no longer going to be reimbursed. And so now we have to solve for that and look forward for planning, like I said, for summer and next school year. So we're doing all of that right now. We are in good shape, I think, because of Randy Tanaka, his team, and everything we've learned working with Haima for the rest of the school year in terms of just goods.
So do we know for each school then what is owed to them?
Yes, we have a chart with all of that.
They have that chart, but
Yes.
let me just add something. Last Monday, I had a conversation with Governor Ige during our Senate leadership meeting, and I brought this to his attention. He was not aware that the schools had not been made whole, and he was going to look into it, and he said that the money was there, and he doesn't know why, they weren't reimbursed. Well, whatever that, he says that the schools should be, reimbursed. So I'm waiting to hear back from him as to how they're going to do that. I'm only saying that the schools are having a double whammy, having to have used their weighted student formula for emergency purposes to assure that our students and our teachers, our faculty, were safe. And now they're being told that they're not going to get reimbursed. So what I'm saying is that if HIEMA, if Budget and Finance is not willing to step up to the plate and reimburse, I think that I'm asking DOE to make sure those schools are made whole, because they're going to get another cut with what we're looking at in the budget. But you guys are forgetting they were already using weighted student formula for something that should have been provided by the state, by HIEMA. It's not their fault. They were doing what they needed to do to protect students and faculty.
We recognize the inequity created when expenses against weighted student formula are distributed by a formula based on student needs, when disproportionate expenses occur at schools and it's not fairly or evenly spread. So this is something that's very concerning, and we have been in communication with Budget and Finance in particular in recent days, and I think that we'll have hopefully a resolution. I think what you point out about schools and their anxieties and frustrations, I think that you're hearing in particular, is in large part a reflection of they just finished their financial plans. They're looking at what they're going to have to adjustments to make next year, and every dollar is critical to them because it means they're having to make very hard choices around staffing. So I'm not saying this isn't an immediate problem. It is, but I think it's also a longer-term problem for the schools in their outlook. Is they're thinking every dollar I can secure this year is going to help minimize or reduce impacts next year. So again, we are working on it and with Budget and Finance, and I think we will have a resolution to help the schools.
I know that you guys are doing the best you can, but I'm just saying, every time something happens at the school level, it's usually the teachers that take stuff out of their pocket to pay because students don't have supplies, students don't have PPEs, and they just have to be made whole. And I know Randy's job is not going to be easy in trying to get this distributed. But I will also say that from what I'm understanding from BNF, and I will give you guys a copy of information I got from Robert Anyway, they're saying part of it, they felt there was that having to deliver to 300 different locations was, I guess, difficult. So I think maybe for Randy listening that you might consider how we can do it by complex areas or something that will be easier for them. Although I think Hawai'i should be more able to do it than our schools because I think they have the guardsmen that were called out to help. I'm just saying that seems to be part of the problem too. Whether or not that's why they're not getting reimbursed, I don't know. But it was the distribution of some of the PPEs that they said were difficult to do. Senator Favela, you had a question?
Yeah, I know we kind of want to chew this up to death, but the reason why for us it's frustrating and the schools are frustrating is right in this room, you were here and the general was here saying this on TV and reassuring the schools that they was going to get reimbursed. And I talked to the schools and they're already getting the cut. We're already losing security, teachers, custodians, adding to our unemployment. So that's the part I don't understand. This is way in the game. Before the teachers, before the principals even went out and had suggested to purchase their own stuff, they was told that they was going to get reimbursed. I reassure you, get reimbursed. Go ahead and get them, and we're going to reimburse you. Not just with you, but with the general saying this. And then for him to say, they give the money to unemployment, and nobody knew about it. It's really kind of like fall between the cracks. And again, it falls upon the individual schools who's suffering. You guys come with a 10% cut that I don't know, maybe you did give the other senators through email. I just like to know how we came about this with the governor and you, because when we was in budgeted downstairs and Senator Kadani asked the governor about the 10% cut, at that time he didn't have an answer and he probably wasn't even known about it. So the principals and you had this 10% cut that you gave to the schools way ahead of any of us hearing, unless we heard from our school principals and the governor. So I don't know if the governor didn't know at the time, and most of us over here didn't know at the time, unless our principals from our complexes came and talked to us about the 10% cut. How did you come up with the 10% cut across the board for each of these schools?
So Senator, thank you for the question. The 10% cut was a direct process that we went into based on the governor's letter to us and to all state agencies that we needed to go through a program review of a 10, 15, and 20% cut.
When that was dated when? Was it August?
October, was that the
October?
It's in October. It's pretty
Early
late.
October.
Yeah, so
Program
we were waiting for guidance on budget process and cuts. One of the things one position that we took, Senator, was that a 10% cut alone was devastating, and that we were not going to go and do the process of 10, 15, 20 because we couldn't even get over the 10% hump of a cut. And so I met with the governor and the budget and finance team and came to agreement that our budget review was not going to include 15, 20% cut, and met with my board and they agreed on that parameter of not going beyond the 10% cut because we also didn't have clarity on the 100.2 million, whether that was going to continue to be taken from our base. And that, as you can see from the chart, that takes us up to potential 22% cut of our budget, not 10% when you add everything up. And we were, I was struggling with, how do we go above the 22%, when we look at all of those cuts, now we're going to get into surpassing 25% of our budget potentially cut if we looked any deeper than 10%. So we stayed with the governor's guidance, but only at the most minimum end of it. We did not go as deep in 15 and 20%. Now, the conversations with the Board of Ed in our board meetings was exactly that. We were not going to go deeper than that, even though the governor had asked all the agencies to go deeper because of the devastating impact on teaching and learning. And because the labor conversation also, while there were conversations early on about potentials of furloughs, just looking at 10% cut, my concern was not furloughs. It was reduction in force because of the 10%. That's not even, so the cumulative was getting so large. So I needed to go through a good budget planning process, but I also needed to say, I can't even pass this because I can't even figure out the devastation of the 10% cut. And so I met with the principals and the CASs, and we agreed to collectively as a leadership team, we're gonna stay with 10%, and we advocated for staying within that parameter for at least the planning process.
If I could, just one correction. It was August 17th is when the program review memo came out. October was when the ban instructions came out. We did not have December is when the board acted, and we did not know what the governor's final decisions were until after that. We had to start our financial plan process earlier, and everything superintendent said about conversing with principals and all.
So when did the governor's office or Bud BNF notify you of what their decisions were?
I'll have to get back to you on the exact date.
So
but it was
but
probably mid-December.
So it was after.
But it
was after the ledge got the budget, or was it right before?
It would have been
right
before.
before,
Just before.
yeah.
Like a couple days sounds like. So if you're saying mid, because we get it on like the 20th.
And our financial plan process had to start in really October is when we started notifying schools.
So I just want to try to figure out how much time did you have between the governor's final submitting it to the legislature and when you found out about their final decision. So if the board took action in mid-December, you only had a
December
couple
3rd.
days.
So it's right after the board meeting,
Yeah,
which was the
the board's recommendation, which I mentioned earlier, was very, very reluctantly put forth, was on December 3rd, and it got transmitted to the administration immediately.
Thanks to you guys.
But I don't understand when. So what I'm trying to figure out is, when you get the governor's decision, what options do you have to kind of like either appeal, make adjustments? What's the timeline? It doesn't, because it's so truncated. Because he had to send a budget and brief to us this came up to, December 20.
There really was not much
I
opportunity.
wouldn't
or
say
no
there was an appeal as much
appeals.
as I was having regular meetings with BNF and the governor to talk about the process I was going through.
So when you look at table
with
4,
leadership team.
look
Mhm.
at table 4.
Table 4 details by
Yeah.
EDN the $164 million, the 10% program review.
But that's all on the governor's decision. So it seems like there's the initial budget department request, BNF request, and then governor's decision. So the governor's decision shows the cuts.
So your question is what the.
No, because what's
time
happening, but
between-
there's some questioning because why are you cutting? And I'm not trying to figure out, are you cutting it or was it the governor's cut? And so who does he take his case to? So from the
yeah.
table, it doesn't sound like some of these were your cuts, they were the governor's cuts. So if you don't necessarily agree with them, it may not be their decision, it was based on table 4.
It was based on a directive to all the department heads that we had to do a minimum of a 10% cut. And so and we had to look at
But
and project
did you
a
receive
15.
further cuts based on table 4? Because it doesn't show All it shows is negative amounts in the governor's columns.
So when we presented this to the Board of Education, we spoke about this wasn't what we wanted to do, what we felt we needed to put forth. I think when asking the question about additional cuts, we're looking at the $100.2 million of carried over non-recurring cuts as being the additional cut that we did not address. We do not have program adjustments to meet that reduction. We thought we were doing the responsible thing in putting forth 10%. We felt it was what we needed to do in the context at that time, and I'm sorry, there's so much flexibility and need for continued conversation this year, and we recognize that.
But it also didn't take into account the 183.6 million that you're getting from the feds, right? You didn't know that at the
No,
time.
this was prior to
That is
that
correct.
notification.
So now you know that you're getting that back. I guess we should be asking you, where are you going to put back?
No, well, when do you get the final amount, and when do you receive the funds? When do you know the final amount?
We know the final amount, it's the
We know that.
$183.3 million. We have been told we'll get it any day. I
Okay.
suspect the change in the leadership in the U.S. Department of Education may be bogging that down a little bit, but that should not be a problem. We should have ready soon access to the $183 million.
Okay, so a lot of these cuts can be restored based on that, those dollars.
Yeah, so when we did the budget, presented it to the board, we identified the highest priorities for restoration, if there are new funds that became available. And so that's what we're presenting to the board on the 21st of this month, is the budget proposal of what to potentially restore with the 183 million.
So if you guys are going on a, say, 10%, how is it that early college got cut by 50%?
So the early college is a bit of a complicated situation. Their current budget this year is $2.5 million. BNF, 1.5 was determined to be non-recurring, which means in building the base budget for next year, the base was $1 million. As part of the 10% reduction scenario, the department put forth another $500,000 reduction. So in reality, that program is going from $2.5 million this year to $500,000 for next year in the budget that's before you.
That's really not
Again,
acceptable.
none of this is what we wanted to do. It's what
No, I understand.
process, yeah.
But, I mean, we should be doing everything possible not to cut from school level. And I'm I'm not sure how many warm bodies you've gone through in your administration, but we need to make sure that we try and keep whole as much as possible. That kind of cut to early college is going to kill the program. I think you guys realize that. And that is not acceptable, particularly because in this pandemic and where people have to be retrained and retrained, this provides opportunities for kids right out of high school to go into the health profession. We saw that last year when HBH picked up 30 kids from Waipahu High School because of the training that they had in the health. I mean, that's what we have to look at. That's what we have to depend on and help get us back to where we need to be in our economic development for our state.
I know
And
those are
I'm
the-
sorry, but that's not acceptable to me.
So is it going to be restored?
Those are the kind of conversations we really want to engage in. And as mentioned in the presentation, we will have a plan put forth by Friday, and we will share it. It goes to the board on the 21st, and they will be evaluating plans around the priorities and alignment of those priorities with the department's strategic plan on the 21st of this month. We know there's...
Right, so what does that mean? So in the sense, you know you're going to get the federal funds, you have these cuts right now. Is it as simple as you're just going to take the federal funds and restore the cuts, or is it more complicated than that?
It's a little more complicated. Superintendent had talked about learning loss, and we have no requests for additional funds for the biennium for general funds. We only have cuts going forward
Yeah, but you
for
have
the
the federal
biennium.
funds to supplant the general funds.
We also
But the
have,
problem is we have new needs.
yeah,
When we're calculating, we don't even have calculated out all the additional supports that are needed for additional instructional time for kids that are falling behind because of the pandemic, the additional infrastructure needs for technology, the PPEs, all of that is costs that are new costs.
Yeah,
So
but
we
how
would
much
need
of
to
that can
add
go into
that.
CIP though? So when you're talking about infrastructure needs, how much of that can actually go into the CIP budget?
I don't think we were contemplating CIP with those dollars at this time. But infrastructure, I think you're talking about human
Right,
capital.
yeah, I'm
and-
talking
and-
about-
and
I thought you were
technology
talking
Yeah,
about
and that.
computers.
Yeah, let me
and
change the
Wi-Fi.
terminology, because it's, yeah.
Because I get that too,
Yeah.
that you're gonna need Wi-Fi, you're gonna need
These are not
broadband.
necessarily, I think, expenditures that would easily fall into CIP or appropriately fall into CIP. But that's the cost, the added cost factor. So we're 400 million in the hole right now. We're getting 183 million, and then we have these unknown costs that are continuing to escalate. And trying to design around what we're going to need for essentially what is a design that's going to have to be a year-round school kind of concept. We need to have a very robust summer school, not for every child, but certainly for those students who are behind. And then students who are 2 or more years behind, they need so much one-to-one support. That's what we're calculating now, because you can't just put them in a small group in a classroom. I mean, they need intensive catch-up in order to go into the small group and back into the classroom.
I think, Superintendent, what I would like to see is how much, how hard a look that you guys took in each AS division to see where the fat is, how could we, and what is their service to the schools? How are they supporting? And for instance, a few years ago, we added 15 equity specialists. How many cases have they had? I mean, they don't even report to the CASs, so I can't ask the CASs. The same with the 15 IT people that we added a couple years ago also. All those positions, they don't report to the CAS. I have no idea what they do specifically for the individual complex areas. So, that kind of going down and looking at how they're serving, that, their CASs. In your Office of Curriculum and Instructional Design, I think there was a presentation to the board, and you talked about reductions in staff and funds for instructional development, admin services and instructional services. So how many general funded full-time equivalent positions are in those sections? What were their job duties and assignments? How do they assist each school and their curriculum? These are the kinds, how many times have the schools requested their assistant? These are the kinds of information that I think would, help, and would help you surely, but would help us too.
Senator, at the last board meeting, we published the data sheets for every department at the state office, showing how many FTEs, how many were being proposed to cut, what percentage of the budget is centralized versus a pass-through, so that there's also a clear understanding that if you look at special education, for example, most of it is a pass-through to the school level. So if you're cutting the state level appropriation for special ed, you're actually cutting at the school level. So we have data sheets we can provide you per department that shows exactly what you're asking for. And for the first time, we've organized it so that the public can see when we say state funds, what that means. What state funds and sits centrally, and what state funds and actually is at a school site. So you can see how many of those employees are actually at a school.
Yeah, I would appreciate that, because I think all of our senators would appreciate to know how
send that
the schools are
immediately.
being supported at, from admin level.
The concerns you're raising are definitely concerns we share.
So
in
those things are basically Table 5 broken down. What you're seeing is online. Because Table 5 are just these big buckets.
For the state.
Yes,
The state level.
yes. On December 3rd, we had the recommendation memo. They went to the board that details by program where those reductions would be happening, not at the EDN level, but at the much lower level. On December 17th, there was further impact statements, and as mentioned in the presentation, at the next board meeting, we'll be focusing on what are the school and complex level supports. So we'll definitely share those materials.
Those are just all further details to Table 5. So Table 5 is just all these big buckets.
It's just drilling into
Yeah.
the impacts and getting at the questions to make it transparent. What was the thinking behind what is before you? And again, none of it what we wanted to do, what we felt we needed to do. In the context at the time, and this is all fluid. We recognize how fluid the financial situation is for the state.
You guys have any more questions before I continue?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, just from a budgetary point of view. So even if you were to supplant the general fund cuts with federal funds, because you have increased needs, you're saying that's still not enough.
Right.
So the difference, you're still going to be short.
I don't want to confuse matters a little, but we have current year shortfalls, and those you see in emergency appropriations in here, in one of the tables, $62 million. Our needs are actually greater than that. We have the $393 million potential in shortfalls. That's both years of the biennium. We have the learning loss, which is another expense. And then we have this $183 million, which is tremendous, but it's not going to address everything. And that's what the board will be wrestling with.
So what is the plan for your learning loss? Has that been planned out, what the programs would be? And so there's a dollar amount that you guys can, say this is what we're going to need?
So our Office of Curriculum Instruction and Deputy Superintendent with the CASs and the principals are planning that out now. So we now have Q1, Q2 data, student achievement outcome data, and we have summer school data. So now essentially you have 3 quarters of information, or I should say 2 quarters plus last summer school. And now they're using that for planning for what summer school needs to address in learning loss and how we prepare for next year. So that's the work that's happening now. And what we're essentially doing is setting aside an allocation of money to protect that as we finalize this plan.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that there's no set amount that we know we're going to need right now for that.
Well, we know what we're going to be able to set aside, and we're going to work with that within the 183 million. We're going to prioritize a good chunk of that.
I understand that, Superintendent, but that's not saying you know what we need.
No, and
Because
I think no
if you
state
don't know
in the
what we
nation will
need and
say,
we're
yeah.
cutting from other places that need it,
Mhm.
we're taking away
Yeah.
from students and schools that need this funding now. So that's what I'm saying. If you guys haven't done your homework and you don't know
Mm-hmm.
where we are, then how can you say this is how we're cutting the debt budget?
Well, the schools are the ones that are pulling together the learning plans and what they need. That's what we're using. We're using this school and student data to generate the plans in terms of mitigating learning loss moving forward. So that's the planning process we're going through now.
My question would be then, okay, I mean, I get kind of confused here. So any of that money is going to go to any other schools for the lessening the 10% cut?
Yes.
I mean, that's the general part, because we're losing the teachers, we're losing, I know some of the schools in my area are losing over $2 million of their budget, and then almost $300,000 on special ed funding. Does any of the special ed funding get any direct funding from feds helping with special ed in our schools, or that we don't get anything from the feds to subsidize
Or
anything for special ed?
Does that come out of the 183, or is there a separate funding mechanism for special ed?
Special education, there's the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, through which we get almost $50 million a year. That what we talked about is consistent. We're relying on that to continue, but that's just to maintain what we've already been doing. The cuts to special education, I think they're in the neighborhood of $30 million to our EDN 150 budget. That, I think, is what you're talking about, and that
Will
is
the 183 portion of the 183 cover that, or are they still going to be short?
So we're looking at using a portion of the 183 to cover part of that special ed cut that we would be forced to make if we didn't have the 183. So yes, we're looking to restore part of the WSF funding to schools so they don't have those deep cuts, and part, if not all, of that special ed funding. And so we're trying to stretch this money out to wrap it around what schools need to protect the classroom and the school site.
Okay, so if you go back to table 5 then, and you have the 183, so in addition to reductions, there's actually additions that are not paid that you can't afford right now.
There's
right?
another $100 million of base
Okay,
budget
so
cut.
basically, you're going to
Exactly.
add another 100 million to this and to this amount. So from the 183 that you're getting, not all of it obviously is gonna be restored. So where, I guess on Friday is when you're gonna tell everyone, these categories are gonna be restored, these amounts. But some of them may be fully restored and some may not.
Exactly.
That's correct.
And we apologize, not to be disrespectful, but we do need to go to the board and have that conversation. And that will take place on the 21st. And you will have information as soon as we have.
Another question, lunches, food. How much of that, we're gonna be restoring, and how much of that we're gonna go back? Since we have been getting subsidized from the feds and other agencies to continue the feeding of the children that was at the school. Because some of the parents and some of the community members are saying, we don't need to go back to a full-on menu, because the sack and go and the bag and go was just as good, and it was enough to take care of the children in the morning and in the afternoon. If we're gonna go back to a full menu, and you know and I know, in the elementary level and in the high school level, we get more waste than actually consumption. So now when you guys did, or the federal program did the sack and go, they noticed that there was less waste on campus, and even the parents reported that even when they went home, there was less waste. So again, if we're gonna go with the full meal, juice, milk, apple, salad, the whole 9 yards, and we're spending this per plate, per school, is only gonna rise to the budget that we are right now. We're still under the pandemic, should not even even thinking about going back to a full menu. So what I heard is that most of the schools, kids are coming back, and then we're gonna go back to a full menu. I think that would be a disaster and a waste of funds in going back to a full menu when most of the schools don't even have a full student body. So I think you guys should look into that too, because using that kind of money to be buying all the rice and food and everything, and not be able to feed the multitude of kids that they need to feed. The sack lunch was just as good, and it was just enough for the kids to get by during the morning and in the afternoon. So that's something that I know is a huge cost to the DOE is food. So if you guys can look into that, because I think it'll be devastating to even having the schools have to make a full menu, making the principals and the cafeterias go with a full menu, knowing that that's coming out of their budget of running the school. I think that's gonna be hard on them. If you guys can look into that, please.
Thank you, Senator. We do have federal standards and requirements we have to meet, but we're also trying to look at how we maximize the flexibilities there are for exactly the reasons that you're raising. So we do have a team that's reviewing this right now.
Yep, okay.
So thank you.
Superintendent, in the latest funding from the feds, are they providing funds for Hawaiian language and education programs, or is that included in that 183.6?
There's that separate allocation. Do you have details on that?
I don't have details.
So there's two components. One is just the academic programming we provide falls under our 183 million, right? Because they're part of our schools. But there is a separate allocation that the state should be receiving. I don't have details on that. That doesn't come through the DOE.
So we haven't been given those numbers yet, but it should be coming.
There should be some allocation to the state for the Hawaiian population, and what the scope is and who's going to manage it here, I don't know.
And what about for the charter schools?
The charter schools fall under our appropriation.
We're anticipating providing, similar to the $43 million where fair share was provided, doing that again.
So that has come out of the 183.
Yes.
183. There was some, in the authorizing language for the ESSER funds, the allowable uses, one of the things it states is that it can be used for any purpose for ESSA, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, IDEA, and a whole laundry list. And I think one of the allowable uses was for purposes also authorized under the Native Hawaiian Education Act. That caused a bit of confusion and anxiety around how that would be operationalized. So it is an allowable use of the 183 and the 43 million.
I wanted to ask one more question to deal with our alternative learning centers. You know, that was a big thing for us in getting these ALCs, and I think the intent was to, you know, see if we could do more. I'm sure we're not looking to, you know, fund more right now, but has there been any movement? I mean, I'm talking about, you know, we have Olomana storefront and Papahana Oka'aina in the Waianae. And I understand they're doing very well, and you know, hats off to AS Armstrong for continuing to see that they you know, thrive. But I just wanted to know, because I think it was the intent of the legislature to, you know, continue these models and see where we would like to expand. But is there any report that talked about this? I know we're not going to do it right now, but moving forward.
Well, we funded some money for a plan, didn't we? When we initially added the amounts.
Right,
We
and
added
that
the
was
money.
supposed
So, an
to-
establishing
that was
of a
supposed to give
director
us
and
that
a lot of
information, yeah.
expense. So we'll have to go back and see where that is. In this budget, I know the funding for the ALCs was disproportionately protected in a sense, in that there's a 1% reduction in that area of the budget. But we'll have to go back and see where the plan, what the status on that is.
Thank you.
So the you know, the news report that outlined the number of cuts of 2 positions. This does not include the funding that you're getting from the feds, right?
No, it doesn't include the adjustment that the funding will now, the impact it will have back on
Yeah.
planning.
So this number will be reduced based on what you decide by Friday.
Yes, and we're right now running through the final numbers that are calculated from the financial plans from the schools. That's also being presented to the board, and the adjustment that we'll be able to propose based on the new monies.
So I don't know that we can put general funds back. I wish we could, but I think what we're looking at is offsetting or using federal funds in place of some of those
Yeah.
areas that were reduced.
Right.
And we'll share that information for sure.
Okay, so by Friday, you'll have a new outline of how many positions are actually.
It'll be a proposal. We put forth we kind of outline the issues a week in advance when we go to the board, so that they have materials when they're presented with an issue to deliberate on.
So Senator, I want to be clear, on Friday, what we have is the cuts, if we didn't have any federal funding, right, that by school, and we'll have the proposal to try to reinstate some of that money back. Now, the schools will have to go back and indicate, because they're not going to get all of their money back, and now they'll have to go back and say how they're going to use those funds.
Yeah, so you guys are you're going to go back one by one, saying, okay, you got this much back. What are you going to get? What position do you want back?
So they're gonna go back and adjust their financial
Yeah.
plans based on that.
And what's the timing on that?
Well, there is a process we'll have to go through based on whether the other competing needs right now we still have that are still unmet needs.
Yeah, that timing question is an excellent issue. I mean, we have an entire legislative process to get through, and this is always a frustration for schools when they do financial plans to not really know for certain what they're ultimately going to receive. But we will be communicating to schools with the best information we have so that they can anticipate adjustments. There's a number of decisions that still need to be made, of course. Probably the most important one is the legislature's ultimate decision on the budget.
Is there some discussion on, I guess this is for Randy Tanaka, but some discussion on reducing transportation costs by rescheduling bell times for students?
Yes, so A.S. Tanaka, can you answer that question about where we are in the study on our transportation schedule, school schedules? Randy, are you still connected?
I see his name.
Yes,
Oh, there.
yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. So Senator Kidani, yes, we are actively managing what our pickup and our route schedules have been. Clearly, ridership has been done, reduced. There are some savings in that area. And so that's part of our budget adjustment. We also have looked at reducing contractors. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So a number of service contractors we've reduced back. We've frozen unfilled positions, and on a case-by-case need, especially in the food service area. So we have, as directed by the superintendent and AS Hallett, that exercise of 10, 15, 20%, we have taken a hard look at that.
So, if we have contracts for bus services, were we able to do savings when the pandemic hit and we didn't need all the bus service? Was that
Yes,
something we
we-
did?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Was that something that's written into the contract, so if we don't need the service because of some emergency or whatever, is that we can, recoup or, not continue with the contract?
Yes, we're not locked into 100% of the service as we would be operating in a normal situation. We have rollback positions. There's a minimum of 25% that is maintained, but it's not 100% of the contract that we have to fulfill.
So what was the percent savings on transportation?
Oh, I've got to get that number back to you, but it is substantial based on the ridership. And please note, we have to fulfill the special ed requirements. That is not someplace where we can give.
So Randy, let me just share from the fiscal services perspective, we were watching that closely, and the latest information we received is they're projecting a right around $50 million expense this year. They have about a $62 million budget. So at this point, extrapolating forward for the rest of the year, it looks like there may be some savings there. So it is something we're watching closely. Of course, we also have a $25 million approximately shortfall in food service. So those two kind of unfortunately cancels each other out. But we are watching that, and it will definitely be part of our planning going forward.
Okay, Senator Keith Agaran.
And this is sort of along the lines of what Mr. Tanaka was talking about. To what extent have you frozen all the vacancies in the planning and in the capital improvements area? Because I guess my concern is really about whether or not you'll have the capability to implement a number of the projects that you're asking for, the ones that have already been authorized.
We're short of personnel in that area, but we've done some process changes. We have not fallen into the place where projects are lagging because we don't have personnel to execute those programs. We're focused on the large projects and some of the more critical projects in specific areas. So right now we're tracking okay. We're not ahead of pace. We're right in the zone where we think we should be. We lapsed 12 million last year, June 30th, but that was not lapsed because projects couldn't go out. That was lapses in project changes. So out of the 498 when I walked in the door in January, with the potential lapse, we ended up with 12 million in the lapse. So our team did a real good job of hustling in the right direction.
So you're confident you can handle the additional projects that are being requested for this year? I think it's mainly a lump sum as I've seen so far, right?
That is correct. That is correct. And the one area that we stay real focused on is the repair and maintenance, the unforeseen breakers going down that affect the entire school, and we didn't account for that. We have a budget for that, but, it goes up and down depending on just the general wear and tear on the equipment.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so, I was, attachment C, page 13. So I'm not sure if the members are able to see that.
Is this the December 3rd memo?
No, your November 20. Stacy, do the members all have attachment C? It shows your budget reduction scenarios by program. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
that's it.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
it.
that's
Yeah.
from the December 3rd
Okay.
board meeting.
It's a link in the PowerPoint that was sent.
Okay, so if you can,
Go to the DOE PowerPoint.
The last on 6. PowerPoint 6.
so is this still accurate until you decide how you're going to restore some of these?
These are at the state program level. What we talked about is that we are now going to be presenting to the board at the school level. So the priority is going to be primarily restoration of the cuts at the school level,
Which would that?
which is not available until this next board meeting.
No,
This
so
one
which
is
line
just at
item
the
would that be in this?
That wouldn't be in here.
Try this one.
So, yeah, Chair's question is about the school level cuts, but this only represents the state level also.
So,
Well, not
so
necessarily, because High Core is only one school, and that shows 1.8 cut.
So I to orient, this was the December 3rd memo to the board. It was organized by office of oversight over the programs. So on page 7 is the Office of Fiscal Services, and that's where you'll see things like weighted student formula. You'll see under the Office of Student Support Services, you'll see the sped per pupil allocation. I think you'll also see High Core. That is on page 12, starting on
Yeah,
page
so
12.
you separated ALCs from High Core?
Yes, so they have separate program, we call them program
Oh,
IDs,
okay,
or
thanks.
when we allocate the money out, we send it out in these programs, yes, so.
Oh, I thought High Core was part of the ALCs.
The money that was added about 3 years ago, the bulk of it went into the alternative learning programs. A little bit of it went to High Core and Olamana as well. I think you can see, alternative learning programs, the 1% reduction there, $44,922. Those would be potential candidates for restoration or
Yeah,
or
so I'm
for
looking at,
offsetting.
because you have some that are high, some are medium, some are
Right.
low. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming that you're gonna try to reduce, get the high to low.
Yes.
And get the medium to low.
Our priority is to look back at everything we identified as high priority, and the low to medium are the ones that each office identified as either their lower priorities because there was less cut made to them, and so they're in good shape, or that they can still meet their mission with some sustained cuts. So we'll be going back to look at restoring those are the high priority first.
Okay, and then medium.
Yes.
I think there's at least two variables at play. One is the amount that was cut. When we have a higher percentage cut from a high priority program, I would expect that would be a higher priority for restoration than a high priority with a low percentage cut. So I just want to acknowledge that. ALCs with a 1% cut, it is a high priority program. Weighted student formula, high priority program, 10% cut. So those are the things that the board will be wrestling with on the 21st.
Okay. So you're taking this broad approach here, but on Friday, you're going to be talking to the board at the school level, which somehow still fits into this. And then, so then you're going to update this once the decisions have been made at the school level, because that's going to change these numbers.
It'll change what we are restoring with the 183 million federal funds.
So the board will be making decisions that will affect at the program level. We'll then have to translate that to what it
To
will mean by
this,
school.
yeah.
And then informing the schools, and then all the personnel things that need to
And then
happen.
collecting that, and then the collective information is going to be reflected here.
And then creating an adjusted budget based on that, yes.
Okay. I guess that's one approach. Any other questions? Okay, because I know you have a hard stop at 2:30, so. Okay, if not, I'm sure this conversation will continue at some point, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.